The first keynote, Shaytan will cry if you see this before Ramadan, is built on the idea of interruption. It assumes that a person is moving through life on autopilot, scrolling, delaying reflection, postponing change, when suddenly they are stopped by something that feels urgent and spiritually charged. The phrase implies that simply seeing the message is already a victory. In Islamic understanding, Shaytan thrives on delay, distraction, and heedlessness. By framing the moment of seeing as a loss for Shaytan, the keynote reframes awareness itself as an act of resistance. It tells the listener that consciousness, even before action, has power. The emotional pull comes from making the viewer feel chosen rather than random, as if this moment of attention was divinely timed rather than algorithmically delivered. At a deeper level, the first keynote leverages the psychological tension before Ramadan. This period is often filled with guilt, anticipation, and intention. Many people feel they should be preparing spiritually but haven't yet taken steps. The keynote doesn't accuse or shame. Instead, it flips the narrative. It suggests that the very fact the person is present right now means they are already ahead. Shaytan crying is symbolic. It represents the collapse of hopelessness and procrastination. The message subtly reassures the listener, you're not late, you're early. That reframing reduces spiritual anxiety and opens the door to motivation rather than avoidance. The second keynote, if you see this before Ramadan, Shaytan lost, builds on the first but shifts from awareness to consequence. Where the first keynote highlights the moment, the second emphasizes outcome. It suggests that this encounter has already altered the spiritual scoreboard. Loss here does not mean Shaytan is permanently defeated. It means he failed in a specific objective, keeping the person distracted, unreflective, or unprepared. This creates a sense of momentum. The listener is made to feel that a line has already been crossed and that going back to indifference would now require effort. Psychologically, this is powerful because people are more likely to continue an action if they believe they have already started winning. This second keynote also taps into accountability without harshness. By stating that Shaytan lost, it implicitly assigns responsibility to the listener. Someone lost because you showed up. That introduces agency. It moves the listener from passive consumption into an active role in their spiritual narrative. Instead of being someone who is constantly attacked or tempted, they are positioned as someone capable of causing loss to an enemy. This is especially impactful before Ramadan, a time associated with discipline and resistance, because it frames self-control not as deprivation but as dominance. Together, these two keynotes form a progression. The first says, your awareness matters. The second says, your presence has consequences. One awakens, the other empowers. Neither demands immediate perfection or dramatic change. Instead, they create a psychological and spiritual opening, a pause where reflection becomes possible and intention can form. This is crucial because real change often begins not with action, but with a shift in self-perception. When someone believes they are already failing, they avoid trying. When they believe they have already won something small, they are more willing to continue. Both keynotes also rely on contrast, before Ramadan versus after. Before carries weight. It implies opportunity, mercy, and preparation. The urgency is not loud or forceful. It is quiet but pressing. Time is slipping but not gone. Shaitan's loss is tied to timing. He thrives when people say a later. Seeing this now breaks that pattern. That is why the message resonates strongly in short-form content. It mirrors the real-life interruption it describes. A scroll is stopped, a thought is planted, and a spiritual countdown begins. Ultimately, these keynotes are not about Shaytan as a character. They are about the internal struggle. Shaytan crying or losing is symbolic of habits breaking, awareness returning, and intention waking up. The power lies in how little is required. Not prayer yet, not fasting yet, not perfection, just attention. And in a world engineered to steal attention, that alone feels like resistance. The third keynote, Shaytan did not want you to see this, is rooted in the idea of concealment. Unlike earlier messages that focus on loss or failure, this one highlights intent. It suggests that there was an active effort to keep the viewer away from reflection, preparation, or awareness. In spiritual psychology, temptation is not always about pushing someone toward wrongdoing. Often it is about keeping them occupied with harmless distractions that prevent growth. This keynote reframes distraction itself as strategic. By doing so, it invites the listener to reconsider how much of their daily routine is neutral versus subtly harmful. The power of the line lies in how it turns a simple moment of attention into an act of exposure, as if a veil has been lifted. This keynote also introduces the concept of resistance without confrontation. It doesn't say the viewer fought or struggled, it says they arrived. That arrival alone is framed as something unwanted by Shaytan. This is important because many people associate spiritual progress with exhaustion, guilt, or pressure. Here, progress is quiet and almost accidental. The listener is encouraged to see themselves not as someone constantly failing to resist temptation, but as someone who occasionally slips through it. That shift builds confidence and lowers defensiveness. When people don't feel accused, they are more open to reflection. On a deeper level, the third keynote challenges the assumption that spiritual decline is always dramatic. By saying Shaytan did not want this moment to happen, it implies that moments of clarity are rare and valuable. It subtly elevates the present second into something meaningful. This can interrupt the cycle of mindless scrolling by creating a sense of sacredness around the now. The listener may not change behavior immediately, but the seed is planted. If this moment matters, maybe others can too. That awareness is often the first crack in long-standing habits. The fourth keynote, a pause. Shaytan is mad you're here, shifts the tone from revelation to confrontation. The command to pause is crucial. It directly opposes the speed and restlessness of modern attention. Where distraction thrives on momentum, pausing breaks the spell. This keynote does not rely on fear or guilt, it relies on presence. By asking the listener to stop, even briefly, it creates a gap between impulse and action. In that gap, choice becomes possible. The idea that Shaytan is a mud personifies resistance in a way that makes stillness feel rebellious rather than boring. This keynote also redefines anger as a signal. Instead of seeing inner discomfort, restlessness, or the urge to scroll away as personal weakness, it reframes those feelings as external resistance. That reframing can be deeply relieving. Many people interpret spiritual discomfort as failure, when in reality it often appears right before growth. By externalizing that discomfort, the keynote helps the listener sit with it longer. If the discomfort means something is being challenged, then staying becomes meaningful. Together, these two keynotes work on the level of attention control. The third reveals that attention is contested. The fourth demands that it be reclaimed. One exposes the hidden struggle. The other invites an immediate response. Neither requires knowledge, practice, or commitment. They work entirely within the moment. This makes them especially effective for audiences who feel distant from structured spirituality, but still crave meaning. The messages do not ask the listener to become someone new. They ask them to remain present a little longer. Both keynotes also subtly shift the listener's identity. Instead of being a passive target of temptation, the listener is positioned as someone whose awareness provokes resistance. That is a powerful inversion. It suggests that even without visible action, the inner life has weight. Shaytan's displeasure becomes a mirror reflecting the listener's potential. When someone believes their presence alone can disrupt harmful patterns, they are more likely to honor that presence in future moments. In combination with earlier keynotes, the third and fourth deepen the narrative. The story moves from awareness to consequence to intention to confrontation. It mirrors the internal journey many people experience before Ramadan. First noticing the time approaching and feeling its weight, then sensing resistance, and finally being invited to stop and reflect. The brilliance of these keynotes is their restraint. They don't rush the listener forward. They slow them down, trusting that stillness is transformative. Ultimately, these messages are less about Shaytan as an external enemy and more about reclaiming agency over attention. In a world where constant motion is normalized, pausing becomes an act of courage. The suggestion that something is mad about that pause makes stillness feel active rather than empty. It reframes presence as power and awareness as disruption. That reframing can linger long after the moment passes, influencing how the listener approaches not just Ramadan, but their daily choices. The fifth keynote, Shaytan will cry, your early centers on timing and mercy. It directly challenges the internal narrative many people carry before Ramadan, the feeling of being behind, unprepared, or spiritually rusty. By emphasizing that the listener is early, The keynote reframes the period before Ramadan as a gift rather than a deadline. Shaytan crying here symbolizes the failure of despair. One of the most effective tools of spiritual derailment is convincing someone that they've already missed their chance. This message quietly dismantles that belief. It tells the listener that showing up before the month even begins is itself a form of readiness. This keynote also softens the emotional atmosphere around self-improvement. Instead of pressure, it introduces relief. Being early means there is room to breathe, reflect, and reset without urgency. That emotional shift is crucial because sustainable change rarely comes from panic. By framing preparation as something already happening, the keynote reduces resistance and defensiveness. The listener is more likely to engage with upcoming responsibilities, fasting, prayer, discipline, when they feel welcomed rather than chased. At a deeper level, your early speaks to divine timing rather than human schedules. It suggests that spiritual opportunity is not only about calendar dates, but about moments of awareness. Seeing this message now becomes proof that guidance is not delayed. Shaytan's crying represents the collapse of the illusion that growth must wait for a perfect moment. The listener is invited to trust that readiness begins with recognition, not perfection. This can be especially powerful for those who struggle with all or nothing thinking in their faith. The sixth keynote, seeing this before Ramadan, is not an accident, moves from reassurance into meaning. It directly confronts randomness. In a digital world governed by algorithms, the idea that something is not an accident reintroduces purpose into an otherwise mechanical experience. This keynote doesn't argue logic, it appeals to intuition. It asks the listener to consider that moments of resonance often arrive when they are needed most. By doing so, it transforms a passive viewing into a moment of significance. This message also heightens responsibility without coercion. If something is not accidental, then it carries weight. The listener is not told what to do next. They are simply made aware that this moment counts. That subtlety is intentional. When people feel forced, they resist. When they feel entrusted, they reflect. The keynote plants the idea that ignoring this moment would itself be a choice, one with consequences. That awareness can linger, quietly influencing behavior long after the content is gone. Psychologically, the sixth keynote strengthens attentiveness. When a moment is framed as meaningful, the mind slows down. Scrolling becomes harder. Distraction loses some of its pull. Even if the listener doesn't act immediately, the seed of intentionality is planted. This is especially important before Ramadan, a time associated with intention setting. The keynote acts as a primer, encouraging the listener to approach the coming month with consciousness rather than habit. Together, the fifth and sixth keynotes work in harmony. One removes fear by affirming that there is still time. The other adds depth by affirming that this time matters. The listener is both comforted and awakened. They are not scolded for delay, nor overwhelmed by obligation. Instead, they are gently positioned at the threshold of opportunity. Shaytan's crying across both messages represents the loss of two powerful tools, despair and meaninglessness. These keynotes also subtly reshape the listener's self-image. They are no longer someone scrambling to catch up, nor someone drifting aimlessly. They are someone who arrived early and someone who arrived for a reason. That identity shift can be transformative. When people believe their presence has purpose, they treat their time, attention, and choices with greater care. This is how small moments begin to influence larger patterns. In the broader sequence of keynotes, 5 and 6 deepen emotional readiness. Earlier messages disrupt distraction and reclaim attention. These messages stabilize the listener in hope and meaning. They prepare the inner ground. Before discipline comes belief, and before effort comes trust. By the time Ramadan arrives, the listener who internalizes these messages may feel less like they are entering a test and more like they are responding to an invitation already extended.